What is good, everyone? Welcome to the channel. My name is Paul and I make videos about Japanese society, life, and culture from the viewpoint of a long-term foreign resident. And today I'm going to be talking about something that happens to foreign residents, especially visibly non-Japanese foreign residents, and that is the treatment that we can sometimes get that reminds us that we are not Japanese, that reminds us that no matter how long we've been in Japan, we are not entirely fitting in. We do not entirely feel accepted into society like a Japanese. Of course, we're not actually Japanese, most of us, but after living here a long time, we kind of get to this point where we want to feel like we're, treated like anyone else. Now, if you come here as a tourist, you probably won't even notice these things. If you are a resident here in Japan now, you will probably recognize the othering behaviors that I will point out today. Because I'm going to talk about the ones that have happened to me the most, and I talked to a bunch of friends and we kind of boiled these down to a list of 5 or 6. And so I want to make one thing very clear. I don't necessarily see this as a negative thing. I know that some people really take offense at being othered, and in my personal opinion, if that sort of thing really bothers you, that's kind of a trait that probably is going to determine you won't stay in Japan for the long term. If you kind of take this othering behavior as whatever, or it doesn't bother me, or I'm not even going to really notice it all that much, it just rolls off your back, then you can probably stay in Japan for the long term, because it's not going to be a death by 1,000 cuts. Now, there are some people out there who would refer to this othering behavior as microaggressions, and a theme of this video is going to be to point out that, in my opinion, a lot of this othering behavior from Japanese people is subconscious or unconsciously done, and to me the term microaggression implies like premeditated. There's meaning behind it. The person has thought that I'm going to treat foreigners this way. And in general, I don't think that's the case, at least not in the examples I'm going to be giving in this video. Now, many of you who watch the channel regularly might be thinking, why is Paul filming in this room? Because he usually does these videos walking around. And I do drop a video every single Friday of me walking somewhere in a new neighborhood, showing a new part of Japan and talking about a particular topic. Today I'm doing it in this room though, because I caught a certain something. I tested positive and therefore should not be out walking around amongst people. And so I'm doing it in this makeshift studio today. So that's why my normal Friday video is happening here. As you can see though, I'm basically okay. I haven't had any strong symptoms to speak of, and I hope it remains that way. Without further ado, let's get into the first of this othering behavior that, if you're a resident, you've probably experienced it. And that is when I go somewhere with my wife and I ask a question in Japanese to staff or to a clerk or to a teller at the bank or something, perfectly acceptable Japanese, they've clearly understood it, and they begin to answer the question to my wife. So I've asked the question and they are giving the response to my wife. Not to my wife's credit, she will just kind of act like she's not paying attention. It's like, I didn't ask the question, I don't care. And they usually get the hint that, oh, okay, I guess I should be talking to him. And so it's a little bit irritating in the moment, because it's like, I asked you the question, but me, look at me. And this is something that I think a lot of foreigners in Japan can relate to. Even those who have been out with a non-Japanese Asian friend, sometimes the conversation will be directed towards the Asian because they look Japanese and are therefore more likely to understand Japanese. Now, the second othering behavior that can happen is actually quite related to the first one. And that is, you'll find that if you're in a line for something, you're going to pay for something in a store, a department store, or any kind of transaction like that, you'll find that sometimes the clerk or the staff will ask various questions of other customers, but not to you. This happens to me regularly at a mall that I shop at, where I park, and you have to pay for the parking there. So if you spend a certain amount of money in the mall, you can actually get you're parking validated and it's free. And some clerks will ask me if I would like the parking validation ticket, but a lot of times they don't. And it'll often happen where they will ask the Japanese customer in front of me, do you need the parking validation? Nothing to me. And then I'll hear the Japanese customer after me being asked again, do you need the parking validation? So I'm always like, why didn't they bother asking me? The other big one is point cards. They'll ask the customer in front of me, do you have a point card for us? And then when it's my turn, and then when it's the person after me, do you have our point card? And believe me, if I have the point card, I will be like, yes, 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 give me those points. And that leads me to the third one, which I admit I don't experience all that much anymore. I think this kind of action died a lot during the pandemic, and that is not receiving tissues when it seems like everyone else is receiving tissues. This was given to me by a couple of friends that I asked about this topic. And yes, it happens. There are these people out on the streets of Tokyo, sometimes Yokohama, but not as much, who will give out tissues as a way of advertising. So it's like pocket tissues, very useful, and then they'll have their store information as a insert in those tissues. And this one doesn't really bother me because they actually actively discriminate based on what type of shop they have. And so like a women's salon will not hand out tissues to men. So it's possible if you're a male foreigner and you weren't really paying attention and they don't give you the tissues, you might think, oh, hey, it's because I was a foreigner, when maybe it's just they're not giving it to men, period. So it might be a type of business that they think a foreigner is not likely to be interested in engaging in. I find that this tissue one isn't something that happens so often. I seem to be handed all the tissues that everyone else gets handed. So maybe it depends on the area you're in, but there's the tissue handing out issue. Now, one that I can absolutely agree with, and that is absolutely true, and I think most foreigners, including tourists, can relate to in Japan, that is having the seat next to you on the train be the last to fill, if it fills at all. Now, this is one I've had a discussion about with several different people in my social circle, what we think is going on there. And I personally am of the opinion that it's entirely unconscious. As in, the Japanese will come into the train, see the foreigner, and it's just like, I'm going to grab onto the strap instead of sit down. I don't think it's so, oh, I don't want to sit next to the foreigner. It's not that level of discrimination or fear. What it is, I think it is tied to that avoidance of the unknown or risk aversion. I think it's more like seeing the foreigner, there's this like unconscious thought that maybe they'll speak English to me and I won't be able to respond, or maybe they'll ask me how to go somewhere and I won't be able to help them. It's not something more dark or nasty than that. And as such, I tend to see the open seat as a positive in two different ways. The first is, if no one actually sits there, I have a little bit more space. I don't have to feel like I'm scrunching up. And if people do sit there, I'll think to myself, this person's cool. They have no problem just coming up and sitting next to a foreigner. And yeah, nice people. And so like I get a good feeling either way. So that one, again, doesn't really bother me. And I think that's part of my character. And again, why I've been here for 18 years and will continue living here. Because again, if that sort of thing really bugs you, it's going to be hard to feel comfortable in Japan, because that kind of othering behavior, along with the ones I've already listed, will happen quite frequently. The next one is people defaulting to bad English even though you've demonstrated you can communicate in Japanese. This is very odd because it's clear that they're understanding you but are still trying to use English, and it's not in a I want to practice my English way. It's like they're clearly out of their depth, but feel like they have to use English for some reason. And again, I think it's just an unconscious, like, foreigner, I have to use English with them. They just can't make the switch in their brain that, oh, Japanese is fine. This is relatively rare because most people don't have that problem, but I think you get a few people that panic or have to deal with so many foreigners that don't speak any Japanese that it just doesn't compute. this actually just happened to myself and a friend. A few weeks ago, we went out to eat and we were in a small little place, and we both sat down and talked to the owner in Japanese and ordered in Japanese, and every time he brought us a plate, he had to try to explain something, and he clearly couldn't. He was trying to say, okay, he was trying to explain the food, and he didn't have any way to do so. I mean, he kind of figured out how to say something in the end, but we were helping him along in Japanese, and he was clearly uncomfortable, and he could have just switched to Japanese and been completely comfortable through the entire situation. And I have to say that my friend that I was with is actually way better at Japanese than I am. He actually works in a job where he uses Japanese in his entire day, so his Japanese is lights out, and yet this guy just couldn't functionally switch to Japanese in order to make the conversation go more smoothly. The final one I'm going to bring up is, again, I think it's an unconscious, subconscious thing, like it's a foreigner, let's try to give them the service that they need, and that is being offered a fork or a spoon rather than given chopsticks, hashi, right? And again, I don't think it's something that is like, haha, foreigners can't use chopstick, here you go, a spoon. It's just like a knee-jerk reaction, and it's not even thought about. And the reason why I actually think that is the case is because I've had it happen to me from people who know I live in Japan and know I have been here for years. And the impression I got was after they asked the question, they immediately felt kind of sheepish. Like they asked the question out of just an automatic response or an automatic way to start the conversation, and then realized, well, that was actually a pretty stupid question. So I don't think for the most part people are doing that as a discrimination or as an aggression, but rather it's just like a knee-jerk reaction. And I honestly feel it's a subconscious thing and not a conscious xenophobic or discriminatory gesture. But it is something that'll happen. So again, if that sort of thing bothers you, it's going to be the death by 1,000 cuts, and Japan is going to feel really tough to live in. But I guess maybe one strategy is to adopt my belief or way of thinking that it's just subconscious and they can't help it. And when I say they, it's a very vast generalization, because a lot of Japanese at a convenience store or a supermarket will just give me hashi, chopsticks, like everyone else, and many clerks will ask me if I need the parking ticket. And it's not like I'm saying all Japanese staff or all Japanese people do this. Plenty of people do sit next to me on the train. So it's just that those behaviors do happen, and if you are a resident here, I guarantee these have happened to you. And if you become a resident here in the first year, basically probably all of these will have happened to you at some point. It's just how you deal with it that's going to be important. Okay. Thank you again for tuning in. Again, I apologize for the non-walking version of the video, because I know several of my viewers really like that aspect of it, and I do it on purpose because I like to show Japan happening around me while I talk, because I think this static background is pretty boring. But be as that may, I want to thank you very much for watching this particular video, and I hope to catch you next Friday. Peace.